Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining our webinar today. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Adam Schwartz, a VP of Business Intelligence at Prudential. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks very much. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, so Adam is going to talk to us about the experiences they've had at Prudential implementing their BI portal, and specifically also about the challenges and the benefits associated with that. Adam previously was at Voya Financial, at Mass Mutual, at Travelers, and at Fidelity. So he's had a storied career in the financial industry and insurance space, and I think there's a lot that all of us can learn from this experience, because really, whether you're using metric insights or another product in the technology space, or if you're building a solution from scratch and you're considering doing a BI portal or catalog, you're going to need to go through the process of justifying that, and why is it, what kind of ROI are you going to be able to generate? Today the budgets are tight, and that's a must. And so I think hearing sort of the experience that he's had, I think there are a lot of lessons there that hopefully you can take and apply in your situation. So with that, I'm going to start, before we hear from Adam, I'm going to start and just tee things up with what a BI portal is and kind of what problem it's trying to solve, as well as some examples of what a BI portal looks like when it's metric insights. And that will give you a sense of what we're talking about if you're unfamiliar or new to this technology. And then it'll give you the necessary context to hear from Adam what they were facing with, and what their challenges and their journey with this technology. So with that, what is the BI portal about? What are we trying to solve from a business problem? Let's start there, right? What motivates this, if you like. So in most organizations, there are challenges in that there are lots of sources of BI. Many organizations have at least a few. Some organizations have dozens. There are, and then, when they look at their BI users, when you look at BI users within the organization, you often find that within the technology tools that you have, the engagement level, the activity level is not as high as you might hope. You can certainly identify that particular teams should be using analytics tools to effectively do their work. But when you look at what percentage of those individuals are actively using those tools, it's maybe not where you need it to be. Also, when you look at the report portfolio that's created, if you look at all the BI, using all the different BI tools, Excel, all things that are created and shared within the organization as analytics, and you look at what percentage of those are actively being used, again, it tends to be it's a fairly low number, which means that not really getting a high level of efficiency. And then despite that, or maybe in adjunct to that, all the fact people are not using that information, those people that are trying to use analytics tend to spend a lot of time searching for that information, and there's a lot of wasted time in the organization as a result of that. So, a typical landscape that it might look like is that, maybe as a business user, you're faced with multiple tools. You've got some things in SharePoint, some things in Power BI or Tableau or Cognos or Looker or whatever technologies you have. Maybe there's reports that are pushed out via PDF to a file system, metrics and things in SAP and SQL Server, all manner of different tools, maybe SaaS tools that you're using. And it's a very kind of a disjoint experience with not only having analytics across all these different environments, but in each of these environments, there's often a challenging landscape where you've got lots of duplicate reports, obsolete reports that you've got to get through to find the right content. So if you're new to an organization or you're asking a new question that you haven't asked before, then the simple task of find the right report to answer that question is not a trivial one in most organizations. It's actually quite complex and difficult, and it's a Wild West sort of ungoverned type of experience. So there's no, there might be some point governance in each of these tools, security models and so forth, but there isn't a single way to integrate the experience across those tools in a way that provides proper governance. And the BI portal, or the future state that I think most organizations are starting to think about now, is to create this hub and spoke kind of model, right? Where there is a single place, BI portal, BI catalog, whatever you want to call it, as an entry point for all of your analytics. that it is governed, that it only contains the information that is relevant and accessible to users, and it provides that information in context and gives them an ability to consume that in a seamless way. And this is a really transformative part of the experience for BI consumer. And you'll hear in a bit when Adam talks about, you know, what that's meant, for example, Prudential, as far as the impact that it's been able to realize there. So from a kind of perspective of rollout, when you implement a BI portal, you know, what are you doing? Let's talk through the steps for that. You know, it all starts with plugging into all your sources where you might have analytics. So, and this is all obviously presented in context of the Metric Insights landscape. But in Metric Insights, we have plugins for all the different BI tools, as well as SaaS products, et cetera. We ingest metadata from those tools so that you can identify, you know, what all the reports that are used and so forth. Security model can be ingested, et cetera. And then, you know, that represents everything that's available, but it doesn't necessarily represent everything that you want to publish. So after you've connected to all these different tools, you need to go through this BI ops layer or step. So, you know, where you rationalize the set of things that you're going to publish. So that can be done manually. It can be done using some of the capabilities that I'll show you in a bit that are present in Metric Insights. But the idea is you remove the unused content, you remove the duplicate content, and you figure out, you know, what is that core set of really useful content that you want to be able to make consumable to your users. And often you integrate that with metadata. So you may have a data catalog, Calibra, Alation, Atline, Informatica, whatever you've deployed in your environment that has things like glossary terms, maybe lineage information, maybe various information that might be relevant, data classification, PII flags, things that are going to be really relevant to your users when they consume the analytics. So as part of vetting the analytics, you want to kind of pull in that metadata that's in your catalogs so that you can then make that available for your users for presentation. And with that, then now you bubble up once you've eliminated or filtered out rather the things that are duplicative, that are unused or obsolete, then you can bring that up into a single entry point for a catalog. It's the one place that your users are going to go to access and find all the analytics, irrespective of type. And it's usually going to be governed through your central security model, typically LDAP or AD. Or if your BI tools don't integrate to those, then you'll need to automatically replicate the security model in those tools, because obviously you wouldn't want to have a second security layer that you have to maintain separately from the BI and the LDAP layer in your catalog. So somehow seamlessly integrating that is key. And then you deliver it, right? And you deliver it to your users. And there are sort of two, when we look at it through the Metric Insights lens, there's obviously the desktop, mobile, email type delivery mechanisms, traditional delivery mechanisms, but there are also the more modern delivery mechanisms that you need to be thinking about enabling. You know, the LLM-based integration, AI-based integration is rapidly becoming table stakes for really any application. Is going to increasingly become that way. You know, users are going to ChatGPT and asking questions to find content, or they're going to Claude or what have you. You know, they're going to expect to have that same kind of access experience for the reporting, you know, to be able to go, if they're living in Teams or they live in Slack and they're working over there, they probably want to be able to just try to find a report by just asking a bot there to locate a report for them. And, you know, honoring the security model and honoring everything else, have that same experience as they would if they're at the desktop or if they're on their mobile phone. So a single unified experience, irrespective of what surface the users are working on, is really the goal, ultimate goal for any BI portal implementation. So with that, let me kind of walk through just a few slides to give you a little bit of a demo of what does this mean visually, you know, as we talk about these different stages, and then I'll hand it over to Adam. So on the BI ops layer, this is kind of an example of what we do within as part of our Metric Insights solution, or recent sort of BI ops release. So here you can see we're looking at a reporting catalog. and it's flagging all the potential duplicates that are there, and identifying main reports. So essentially, it's generating a cluster of potential duplicates based on overlap in metadata. So whether that could be report columns within the which specific columns are used in that report, or it can be lineage columns. The fact that these two Tableau reports use the same data set with the same columns, or a large overlap. There's a 90% overlap between these two reports, and therefore they're potential duplicates. So surfacing those and then creating a mechanism by which you can work those and eliminate things that are not needed, and then promote the things that you want into the portal is incredibly important. And this is important not just because the experience of consuming reporting that is duplicative or running into obsolete, unused reports is a bad user experience. It's also important because oftentimes these reports are sitting on top of Databricks or Snowflake or some sort of usage-based metered system. And in fact, if you're running duplicate or obsolete reports on a schedule, you're wasting the company's money, right? You're spending a whole bunch of cycles, spending a lot of money on compute on these databases for things that nobody's really using, or it's duplicative. In other words, you're doing it twice or three times what you need to in order to provide what you need to users. So it's important from both user experience and cost management perspective. Once you have identified what you want to bubble up to your users, you may have a workflow, content publishing workflow to publish that content into the catalogs. As an example of that, you can see, items are being moved through different stages. These workflows can be very simple. It can be just a single step, or they can be multiple steps where, things are synced into a staging area. And then an analyst is responsible for moving it from the staging area into a review area, and then maybe somebody from the business comes in and enriches that information with additional metadata, if that's metadata that isn't available in your data catalog. And maybe they gets to and reviewed and then certified. It can be simple or complex depending upon the nature of the asset. Obviously, a report that's going to be published as part of your board review or shared with the street on your financials, it's going to have a different kind of review process than something that is going to be used just by one user or a small number of users for something that's non-critical. But in all cases, you'll want to have some kind of a governance process for onboarding that content. Then once that content is there, then obviously there has to be a delivery mechanism, a catalog where you're accessing that. This is an example of what that looks like in Metric Insights. So you've got your categories of content on the left, and you've got these various tiles. Each report shows up as a tile with its object, a little thumbnail, and you can search for your content, find it, mark favorites, organize it in folders, and so on and so forth, in order to be able to have a coherent consumption experience for your users, irrespective of type. So you can have your Power BI reports sitting here right next to your Tableau, your Click, your PDFs that are part of that are on your shared file system or your SharePoint content. All the things that have been, again, not everything that's out there, just the things you've passed through that BI governance layer and deemed worthy of promoting into the portal, but making it possible for people to find everything very easily and not have to really even think about what is the type of underlying tool, right? Your users shouldn't care if it's a Power BI or a Tableau report. They just are trying to find the answer to their question, and they should be able to have a single access point that gives them the same experience accessing both, right? If you click through from one of those tiles, then you want to be able to give people an experience where you're enriching the viewing of that content with metadata. So here, this is a preview view, and what you're seeing here is when I clicked on that tile, I'm seeing now what are the enterprise KPIs that are associated with that dashboard. That might have come through the onboarding process because we got it from a Atlanta Relation or Informatica or Calibra, or it might be something that was onboarded by a user as part of the promotion when they certified the report. And then you can see definitions of those. You might know ownership information. You might know, does it contain PII data? Does it have, what is the overall data classification? Any ownership, any number of things that will help a user, even before they're actually using the report, understand what it is they're going to consume and how they should treat that data, right? And creating a universe of content around those key KPIs. So if I define sales a certain way, and that definition of sales is being used by 10 different dashboards, I want to be able to quickly locate all the dashboards that use that definition of sales. And this allows you to do that, create this constellation of content around the key KPIs that you publish within the system. Then once I go to consume that content, I not without leaving the portal, the idea is I should be able to consume it in an iframe experience, independent of tool. But it should be enriched potentially with other things. Like, in this example, you can see I've got, I think it's, I don't know if the Power BI or Tableau report, but above that, you can see in that bar, there's a message that tells you that, hey, you're experiencing data load issues in a warehouse this morning. So the idea being that you should integrate your portal with things like Monte Carlo or Informatica data quality, or any tools that you have that are measuring the data quality, or custom scripts that are measuring the data quality of data as it's ingested, so that if you detect an issue with data, let's say your sales table had 10,000 rows yesterday and today it only has 5,000. Well, you want to be able to flag that to the users so that they know, so that they're not looking, when they look at a report that's based on that table, that they know that is in fact something that shouldn't be trusted right now, and that, hey, somebody's aware of it and somebody's looking into it. So this idea of being able to post notifications, either manually or preferably on an automated fashion, when there's a data quality issue, or maybe when the data load is delayed, that really enhances the user experience and creates, again, a governed experience for consumption of that content, where a user can trust that when they're looking at the report, that all the data quality checks that are downstream, that upstream from that, have in fact passed. Otherwise, they would know about it when looking at that, and that creates a much higher level of confidence with viewing the report, and it creates the bad feelings that generally happen when users feel like they've got to pick up the phone and call an analyst to tell them and the analyst is learning from the user that the report is broken. Right? That's not a good experience for anyone. Search is obviously very important. You've got all the different reports that are out there. You want to be able to search using different criteria. You should be able to search and find things if you're consuming things on mobile, available there, as well as in this example, I think that's Slack. Same idea with Teams. I should be able to use natural language kind of search there and find the content that's applicable that I might be interested in doing. And then another important thing that I'm sure Adam will talk about as well, because it's critical, is the whole idea of discoverability. So, one of the problems is that occurs in all BI environments is that, the security is granted to a particular group or set of groups for a piece of content. And oftentimes over time, there's maybe somebody who's adjacent to that group that isn't a part of that AD group, didn't get access. But the problem is, if they are not aware of that report existing, when they search for it, if they don't find it, they are likely to go and build it or ask someone else to build it for them. So the idea that you can make content discoverable so that people are aware that it exists, maybe see some of the critical metadata for it, and then go through an access request process, maybe ServiceNow or whatever you're using internally within your organization to get access, is really important in terms of not, because then that effort of deduplicating and removing obsolete content, that means that going forward you can make sure that people are aware of things and request access to something rather than creating a duplicate copy. So we talked briefly about concierge, LLM-based offerings. So this is, again, increasingly, maybe not so immediately today, but over time, as more and more LLM interact, more and more people are moving to search via LLM versus search via Google. So the same thing applies here. You want to be able to ultimately have experiences where you're going to be asking questions and discovering content via a chat bot type interface rather than simply having search, because a lot of times, that's just more comfortable for users to be able to have a conversation with a chatbot and refine their search with multiple passes. Say, I'm looking for reports that are sales in this particular geography. Oh, there's 20 of them. Well, which of these is certified? And then, oh, send this to me, right? Like all that kind of capability is I think, increasingly table stakes for what people's expectations are with systems. And then the final piece to talk about from a user experience perspective is the customized sort of landing page experience. So once you've brought all these pieces into your BI portal, what that affords you is the ability to consolidate everything into a single unified experience that gets users to value much faster. So this is an example of that kind of experience. So imagine that I, as a user, might have 20 different dashboards that I could look at every day. Well, I probably don't want to open up 20 dashboards every day. I likely don't have time for that. But if you give me this kind of experience where you bubble up a key metric or KPI from each dashboard across the different segments that I'm interested in looking at, color code the things that are in the red or in the green, then I can quickly at a glance figure out if I need to look at something. And then when I click on one of those things, then I'm taken to the dashboard that has all the detail for that. And the same thing on my mobile experience, right? So this is one example of that kind of experience that just creates a consolidated view that's much more tied towards getting people to value quickly and starting with in this particular case, KPI first approach to analytics. And then sort of from an engagement perspective, finally, we should mention that, it's very important once you publish things into a catalog, you've gone through the process of identifying what's there, identifying what's obsolete, removing it, etc. Well, over time, these things will change. Something that might be heavily used today, 6 months or a year from now, may no longer, may fall out of use because some new reports come up or the business has changed. So being able to really look at content usage over a period of time, looking at how engagement is changing for your content is also vitally important as part of your BI portal solution, because that allows you to be able to groom this content continuously and not only add new content, but deprecate and remove things that are not there, as well as if you identify something that should be used and it's not, promote that to users and make sure that people are aware of the things that they should be consuming. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adam so he can talk about kind of the Prudential journey.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marius. So yeah, I mean, using a tool like this to try and solve our core problem, I'll get into kind of, what that looked like for us, right? So first of all, what kind of scale are we talking about here? So it's a financial services organization. We're multinational across 40 countries. We have 40,000 plus employees. I think when you've got like a very small scale organization, you're kind of like, oh, okay, I can kind of manage this manually. But once you start getting to be at scale, you start encountering these problems of scale where things that used to work well kind of with word of mouth just stop working really well. So if you pop off kind of the next slide there, Marius, talk about the business problem here. So one, we're a historically federated organization, as are a lot of companies, right? They're allowed to make their own decisions, determine their own future. Those things are business decisions, but that also means that they're picking the tools they want to use. And some of these tools come through decisions to buy sort of similar stuff because someone's got a favorite tool. You've got situations where we acquire companies and they bring a tool set with them. And in the process of acquisition, no one says, hey, let's get off this tool set and move on to whatever the current kind of corporate standard is. And so we've purchased everything. We have Cognos, we have SAP Business Objects, Power BI, Tableau, OBIE, PowerPoint, Excel, you name it, we've used it and probably have a license for it. And kind of the core challenge then becomes is everything is everywhere, right? And so if you don't know who the person to talk to about something is, then finding the right report is difficult. You might even find a report, someone says, oh, I have this report, but it's difficult to understand if it's authoritative. It's difficult to understand, is it up to date? We don't always put, latest update dates on our report. So you've got this information and you're not sure if it's valid. And so our experience was lots of report duplication showing very similar things, not always exactly the same, and users who weren't even sure what to trust. And that really pushes against our goals of having a data-driven organization, right? Where we want organizations to be data-driven, you have to know you can trust the data and use it. And if you can't get that far, it really doesn't matter what you have. We found teams who are like, that's great, you have this chart, but they actually liked going through the process of recreating the chart by hand, because that's how they developed any trust the data was right in the first place, which is really challenging for us as an organization and time consuming, right? And that's just not a way you want to spend your energy. It's far better to be spending your energy making decisions about the business than spending the time just putting together the report. So let's pop on to 25, next slide. And talk just kind of about the possible solutions we have right in front of us. So one is you could try replatforming everything. Not surprisingly, like this is a very expensive way to go and it's very difficult to execute on. There's lots of change management for organizations, right? Who don't want to give up their favored tool. And you end up spending this inordinate amount of energy trying to get off these platforms. That's not to say I don't think you should develop a strategy about what platforms are your favorite platforms, where should new stuff be built. You absolutely should. But you have to acknowledge that you've got this legacy of stuff and it's not going away anytime soon. And so we did some of this replatforming, and it was expensive for us. It was painful, right? We're in the midst of a kind of a 2-year journey to try and get off one platform. And you start getting a lot of these legacy platforms where enormous amounts of stuff has been built up over the course of a decade or more. The ROI of getting off that platform is often really, really poor, right? The license and infrastructure savings that you could experience are really modest compared to the cost of reducing that platform. You're also likely to end up in situations where, if you've got enterprise license agreements with companies where you've purchased a product that's part of a bigger suite of products, you've purchased something from Microsoft, it's part of an ELA or Salesforce, and you're getting Tableau through an ELA, you often don't even really have the opportunity to save money by getting off that platform, because it's like squeezing a balloon. So you can spend your effort replatforming, and still end up kind of not a lot better off overall as an organization. Your other choice is, how do you catalog it all in one place? And your first kind of gut reaction is, oh, I'll use an Excel file, I'll use a SharePoint list. These things tend to fall flat, right? They fell flat for us. It's too hard to find anything. The list gets extensive. There's too many columns and too much detail and no visual appeal. And one of the things we've really learned over the years about BI in general is people really aren't willing to engage with ugly data. It's just, they don't want to. And so as much as you can say, well, this chart's got all the information I want, you just got to take the time to read it. If you don't help people who are busy find the things they need and then use them effectively, they're not willing to use it. And one of the things we found is people often don't know the exact name of a report. They might know it's something about sales. They might know it's something about risks or issues, but the actual visual showing them a thumbnail of the report and what it looks like is really useful for someone to go, oh yeah, I've seen that in a meeting, in a presentation. That's the thing I really should be going after. And so I think you have to set a corporate direction for which technologies you want to use, discourage the use of the others, and then acknowledge that everything else exists and work to bring them together in one place. Marius also hit upon a really important detail with discoverability. Any of these tools we have in-house today, if a report is locked behind an AD group and you can't access it, you also can't search for it. And so as far as you're concerned, it doesn't exist then. And so having a layer where you can say, I'm allowed to know this thing exists, and there's a mechanism for me to request access to it because it was helping me in my business decision making and I have valid use for it, is really helpful to then get someone to the data they need to use, so that doesn't become, oh, a request to a data analyst who then decides to write a query against the database and returns the result in Excel for this one-off purpose when there was a perfectly usable dashboard. You just waste a lot of time with something like that. So it's really helpful to have this cataloging solution. And I think it's important to have a cataloging solution which is sophisticated enough that it makes people's lives easier, right? And it isn't just the really low file, make a SharePoint list, right? We just didn't have success there. So let's pop on to kind of talking about approach. You've decided you want to build a catalog. You got to figure out how you want to go forward with this, right? So one of the things we started with was use cases for specific areas to build enthusiasm around the idea of cataloging. So I don't think you want to start with like, I'm just going to catalog everything. Although there are tools like through BI Ops that Marius mentioned that let you kind of filter and say, this is the good stuff. Getting some people enthusiastic, and particularly what we found, getting some really high level use cases where executives are saying, that's where I'm going to find my report. If it's not there, I don't believe it exists, really start to drive action for the organization. We have not found as much luck at a bottom-up approach, right? Or really a top-down, like, let's make this really work for people who can use this data to make decisions, really motivates people to get their stuff into your catalog and make sure it's correct and useful. And I do think you're always having to address the challenge of, for some people in some roles, creating the report is the job. And when that's the job, right, and not deriving insight from the report, it's not the audience who's going to come to your catalog, because that's not their job to derive insight. It becomes their job to create reports. And so if you can make cataloging easy and you can make dissemination of information easy, you can drive a lot more action with your reports than you can if you spend all your time just creating the reports. So we used financial reporting as a kind of exposure water audience. This is like the key use case. Everyone needs it. It works everywhere in the organization. Everyone's got a budget to manage at the management level. And so it's a really useful place to start, where you're starting to give people access to things like our travel reporting and expense, our cost center reports, our contractor information. All this financial reporting was scattered through a bunch of reports is now in one place that you can use. The next thing we did was develop a taxonomy for all the reports. So you can start with these specific use cases, and you should. As you start expanding, you need to start thinking about, and probably should start thinking about at the beginning, how do I organize all this information, thinking with the enterprise in mind? So you can definitely build kind of one-off use cases where you're like, okay, this is my use case of cataloging all the financial reports, and here's my use case of cataloging all the sales reports. You're still isolating your information right into little pockets. It's a broader pocket than, one person knows one thing, but it's still pretty narrow. So we found that people, through a card sorting task, that people tended to find things, search for things, looking for kind of the business unit or corporate area by who produced the report, not necessarily who consumed the report. And so if you wanted to find an important financial report, most people would go to the corporate finance area and look for the report they were looking for, rather than, say, go to the sales department and look for their financial report, right? Because they might be the consumer of that specific report, but most people tend to look where people created stuff for it. So that helped us validate that taxonomy, and make sure that people understood where they're going to find what they're looking for. And then lastly, discoverability. This is a big cultural change for us. We hide stuff, and hiding that stuff means that we don't allow other people to discover it. And there absolutely are things you're going to have in your organization that you don't want people to discover, that you should not make easily discoverable. I'm not saying you don't catalog them, you can turn discoverability off, but there are definitely things that are sensitive. Like, hey, if it's a report about a specific acquisition, that's a problem.
Sorry about
Otherwise,
that.
um,
I'm sorry. It's totally
yeah, no
screwed up the
worries.
presentation here.
That's all right.
Okay, here we go. Sorry. There we go.
Yeah.
All right, this one.
So, again, I think with discoverability, right, that big change for us is letting people know stuff exists. And when they know it exists, then they can take advantage of it for their business decision making. And, even if they're not a member of the sales department, it doesn't mean they have no reason to understand what our sales data is like in forecast. Because if you're in finance, you might want to make a forecast about what our revenue is going to be like, and that involves sales data. So having that additional insight to make your model a little more complex, a little more sophisticated, is dependent on you being able to find what's really important to you. So we want to continue to drive adoption through discoverability. It's a big change for us, as I said, but I think a really meaningful one. We can pop on to the next slide. So ultimately, right, when we start talking about kind of the benefits of what we're getting, we've got 3,000 users to date, right? We're a 40,000 person company. Not everyone's going to use this. We did a time study surveying users to figure out what it was going to take them, what it was going to save them to make finding the reports easier. And the average user for us is sitting at about 26 minutes a month they would have spent searching. And that doesn't seem like a lot. Like, 26 minutes a month, it adds up across the scale of our organization. So take the number of users, take the number of minutes a month, multiply by your blended rate for a resource. For us, this is looking like $1 million a year. Just saving people time finding the things they want, right? And that doesn't even take advantage of the things we do where we get rid of duplicates and clean up our infrastructure and stop storing those things, and maybe buy less licenses because we have a cleaner infrastructure overall. This is just the pure kind of time savings component of just making data accessible to people so they can spend more time doing their job and less time searching for the stuff they need. If you want to go on to 28. So this is not ours, but it's an example of the kind of custom experience we built for users. So the left side navigation here would represent our hierarchy, right? You would see enterprise at the top, and then you would see the various business units. You'll see corporate functions. You'd be able to drill down in a very logical way to find stuff you want. In the middle, you've got kind of that nice visual appeal of finding my favorites, marking the things I want. You can search within this section if you want to find things. You've got your favorites off to the right. So if you favorited something but you're not sure where it was in the whole hierarchy, you can kind of roll your own dashboard of dashboards where you can say it's these 7 things that I usually go to, and then you can quickly find them if you've been visiting something because you recently viewed it, it can be really helpful to see that. And then for each report, you get all the things that Marius talked about. You get information about each report. You know you know where your favorites are. You can discover new things that you might want to add and come back to later. Ultimately it just makes it easier to find things when you have an experience like this. And we're actually building this experience or working off this experience. Our executive team are iPad users, right? So you need an experience that's going to work well on an iPad. So certain things like hovering doesn't work as well, right? So we've been able to, with custom solutions, you don't have to have your tile look like this. We've been able to make them larger so they look nicer on an iPad for what our leadership kind of said was a bunch of old people who didn't have good vision anymore and were working on a small screen. You can move things like the metadata down under the titles or anywhere you want it. So you now, instead of us saying, where did this come from, like ClickSense, instead it will have a short description of what this thing is. And we move that out so that people more readily can understand what these reports are. Because there's a lot of control over managing this experience and making it feel like something familiar they're used to navigating so they don't have to learn a new way of navigating stuff. So we've just been able to continue to leverage the customizability of a solution like this to continue to engage users and understand what's really going to be appealing to them for drilling into their data. Let me hop on to what's next for us. So for us, really now, the focus is on friction reduction, right? So one thing is, like most groups, most companies, we use a tool, SailPoint in our case, to request access to stuff. You may have that tool, you may have another one. But integrating this with access management becomes really important. We want to take it from, I know there's something out here I want, and I know who owns it, to I want to just be able to seamlessly say, can I have access to this? We're rolling it out to executive leadership. I mentioned this on the previous slide, building these custom portal pages to make an iPad friendly experience. And lastly, although we have data governance tools right now, we're not integrated with them. So if you want to understand where the data sources are in Lineage and help build trust in where did this data come from, we're going to do that integration as well. So we should be able to differentiate between something which actually came from one of our trusted databases and something that someone exported to Excel and built something new. We cataloged it. It's nice. It's useful. But our trust factor should be lower on it because there's a middleman touching the data. So allowing us to integrate with our data governance tools will allow us to just increase the trust in our data going forward. And I think, Marius, with that, I sort of reached the end of my bit of where we are. I don't know what you want to do next. Take a few questions,
Thank you.
or
Yeah, let's do a few questions here, and just a few things. Are maybe could you describe a bit more? Just the model that you have as far as I know a lot of people sometimes use centralized as a decentralized model. Is there a centralized team that is kind of deploying everything, or has that been decentralized to different groups? How does that work?
Yeah, so right now, for Metric Insights, which we deploy that centrally, right? So we control the experience of deploying new content. We're actually working towards democratizing that and allowing people, power users in the system, to self-deploy their own content into the workspace. Right now, what we want to manage is just making sure people put stuff where it belongs in the hierarchy, right? Because you always get people who have different thoughts about where something belongs. So we want to manage that a little bit. And one of the things we're looking to do with our experience is make it easier for users to recommend content. So we'll actually be adding a tile, which allows basically a little dotted line, a little plus symbol in it. And you can say, I want to recommend content for right here. And then you give us the URL to it, and we'll review it and add it if it makes sense. So we're trying to keep the barrier really, really low so that this can be used in a democratized way, right? And not a centrally controlled, we're the only people who decide what deserves to be on the portal.
What about as far as the engagement and driving engagement? Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you studied sort of and analyzed the engagement of your analytics and applied that towards what you're publishing?
Yeah, so a couple things we want to look at. Like, one, who should be using these dashboards? So we've extracted data about every user. We join that with our org data, and we look at your job title. We look at where you are in the organization in terms of which business unit you're in. And we look at basically market penetration, right? Who's adopting, who's not using, where do we want to see it, right? So that we can figure out who do we need to target. And although there's always going to be needs for individual contributors to view reports and make kind of very local decisions, we're really focused on looking at our director and above population to say, are we adopting here? Are people being data driven in the spaces that we expect them to be, right? We're building these dashboards for strategic decision making. Not that we don't have operational dashboards as well, but we want to make sure that the right audience is hitting things. So pulling out the data here and taking advantage of the usage data that a tool like this has becomes necessary for us then to join it to our own internal data and get an image of really where adoption is. So we look at this. We also look at the underlying tools, Tableau, Power BI, and so on, and look at adoption data there to see also who's gone and bookmarked stuff directly, and is there stuff that is popular that we should be ingesting. So we're also looking at the other way to say, why is this thing that so popular and we haven't made it available to other people via our portal?
To do that, I guess you're merging in data from, because obviously the Tableau and Power BI environments don't know about, for example, what level in the organization you are,
Right.
but you're merging data from Workday or other systems that have that information in with the usage data and then doing that
Absolutely.
analysis.
Yeah, I think it's great to usage overall to say, hey, usage is growing. I want that kind of top line fact of like, is it growing? Then I want to be able to ask questions about, is it growing in the ways we want it to be growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where if it's just growth because of kind of individual contributors using one very popular operational report, that's really not the growth we're looking for. And so we've got to be honest with ourselves about who do we really want to adopt and who is this for?
Well, you mentioned that you want to kind of create that you want people to use authoritative sources of information. And I wonder, one of the challenges, I mean, we see this all the time, and I think it's just universal in any kind of portal solution. You're always competing against bookmark links, right?
Mhm.
It's easy enough for anyone to do that. What are your thoughts about that? What techniques are you using or approach that you're using to kind of create value beyond what's there when people just bookmark and go to the report directly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably always going to be an audience of people who bookmarks the one thing they look at all the time. And again, I think that's not necessarily the audience we're seeking, right? We're looking at a layer higher where decision making starts to become more complex. And it's like, you're not going to get everything you need to know off a single report. So let's let you take this, right? And so you kind of to your favorites idea that we share, right? This idea of favoriting. What we want to do with it actually allow someone to build kind of their own central tile, like the one that's shown here, which is just the list of all your favorites with all the images, right? And then move towards some of that aggregation stuff where we're actually bringing little bits of data from lots of reports into something a little bit like what you showed off, right? Where we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
make it more useful that stop here first, know what you need to pay attention to, and
Mm-hmm.
then drill in, not just,
Mm-hmm.
jump from thing to thing to thing looking for something to worry about, but really focus on the key metrics and getting people focused on taking action where action is needed, but also not taking action where no action is needed, right? Like we don't want to mistake action, activity for progress.
Okay. And there's a question here also, I think it's from Matthew, that has this reduced the need to access some systems if they can get through the portal?
Yeah, I mean, we find that it makes adoption easier for people. Obviously, because part of this is acknowledging that stuff is where it is. What it does allow us to do is see what's being used and what's popular. And so, for example, certain systems, we've reduced the size of the systems by about 95% as a result of just optimizing the use and understanding what's not used, what doesn't need to be cataloged, what's duplicative, right? We had a lot of kind of like the same report, and it would be the same report month to date, week to date, year to date. It's like, okay, what this report really needed was a filter at the top. And we could see that through usage patterns. It's like, we can simplify here, and that simplifies our infrastructure, allows us to reduce further.
Right. Thank you. Okay, well, with that, Adam, I think those are questions. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience. I think there's a lot that the audience can take as far as just things they can apply to their initiatives as they think through any kind of portal work that they want to do. So thank you so much for generously sharing your experience and tips with others. And thank you all for joining our webinar today.
Thanks, Marius. Appreciate the opportunity.
Bye bye.